I want you to picture a scene that is, well, it's probably going to feel a little too familiar.
Oh, I bet.
Right. So it's a Tuesday night. You're sitting on your couch. You got your phone in one hand, and your thumb is just like mechanically swiping through a social media feed.
Just infinite scrolling.
Exactly. Maybe you have a streaming show playing in the background on the television, something you're only, half watching. In that specific moment, it feels like the most solitary, disconnected activity in the world.
Yeah, you feel completely in your own bubble.
Right. You're in your own little digital bubble, completely isolated.
Yeah.
But what if those everyday, seemingly isolated media habits are actually the exact mechanisms rewiring the entire foundation of how human beings cooperate with each other?
It is a striking image, mostly because it captures the central illusion of modern life. I mean, that solitary scrolling feels private, but it is actually a localized node interacting with this massive invisible infrastructure.
Yeah.
Every swipe is data, and that data dictates our collective reality.
And that invisible infrastructure is exactly the mission of this deep dive today. We are unpacking a monumental stack of economic research.
It's a huge one.
It really is. Our primary guide is a massive 2021 framework compiled by economists Felipe Campante, Ruben Durante, and Andrea Tesse. The paper is titled Media and Social Capital. And our overarching goal here is to figure out how the glowing rectangles we stare at all day long are fundamentally altering the structural integrity of society.
Which is no small task.
No, not at all. So to start, I actually want you, the listener, to visualize a specific transition with me. Picture a giant, abstract network map floating in a dark room.
Okay.
Decades ago, the glowing nodes on that map were these clunky metal television antennas sticking out of suburban roofs.
Right, receiving one-way signals.
Exactly. Today, that map has morphed. It is a dense, pulsating, chaotic web of billions of mobile devices and hyper-connected social feeds, all sending and receiving simultaneously.
And, the visual evolution from the passive antenna to the interactive smartphone isn't just a story about hardware getting smaller or microchips getting faster.
Right.
It is a story about how the pathways of human connection, the actual roads, the information and influence travel on have been completely rerouted.
And when you reroute the information, you reroute human behavior.
Precisely.
So, to understand how the internet and these modern networks are changing our behavior, we have to start at the absolute foundation. We have to look at the invisible glue that holds a functioning society together.
The social capital.
Exactly. We hear this phrase thrown around all the time. It's in the think piece. It gets tossed around in corporate seminars, political speeches, social capital. But when you push someone to define it, they usually just mumble something about, having a lot of friends or knowing the right people.
Yeah, networking.
Right. But I suspect the economic definition is a bit more rigorous than that.
Oh, far more rigorous. I mean, if we look at the framework, the authors draw heavily on the foundational work of scholars like Elinor Ostrom, Tokyo Nan, and Robert Putnam.
Okay.
In the realm of political economy, social capital isn't just a Rolodex of contacts. It is the machinery of collective action.
It's machinery.
Right. It is the underlying resource that allows a group of people to accomplish something together that they could never possibly accomplish alone. And this machinery doesn't run on magic, It runs on three interlocking gears: trust, norms, and networks.
Let's isolate that phrase for a second, collective action. Because on paper, collective action sounds great.
Sure does.
Everyone works together to build a barn, or everyone chips in to clean up a local park.
Yep.
But I remember from my college economics classes that getting humans to actually do this is notoriously difficult.
It is arguably the central problem of human civilization. Yeah, imagine the center gear of our machinery is collective action. That's the desired outcome. You want to organize a neighborhood watch or start a labor union or launch a political protest. But you immediately run headfirst into a core economic dilemma known as the free rider problem.
Okay, I want to make sure we make this tangible for the listener. The free rider problem basically says that human beings are, at a baseline, rational calculators trying to conserve their own energy, right?
That is the underlying premise, yeah. If a public good is going to be created, let's use the Neighborhood Watch program as an example.
Okay.
If that program succeeds, the neighborhood becomes safer.
Right.
Everyone who lives there benefits from the reduction in crime, regardless of whether they actually stayed up until 2 a.m. walking the streets with a flashlight.
Oh, I see.
So if you are a completely rational, self-interested actor, the optimal choice is to stay home, get a full night's sleep, and let your neighbors do the hard work.
You free ride on their effort.
Exactly. You get the benefit without paying the cost.
But the paradox is, If every single person in the neighborhood does that exact same rational calculation, nobody grabs a flashlight, nobody patrols, and the neighborhood remains dangerous.
Right. The collective action collapses before it even begins.
Yeah.
The completely rational individual choice leads to a completely irrational collective failure.
That's fascinating.
So the great question of the social sciences is, how do we ever get anything done? How do we ever overcome that biological urge to just stay in bed?
And that must be where those three interlocking gears come in: trust, norms, and networks.
They are the antidote to the free rider problem. First, you need trust. You have to fundamentally believe that if you commit to showing up at 2 a.m., your neighbor isn't going to flake out and leave you walking alone in the dark.
Makes sense.
Second, you need norms. These are the shared, often unspoken social rules that dictate behavior. A strong norm says, contributing to the safety of our street is a moral obligation, and freeloading off your neighbors is socially shameful.
It's the pressure of social reputation. You don't want to be known as the person who never chips in.
Exactly. And finally, you need networks. These are the actual, literal pathways of communication required to coordinate the whole endeavor.
Like a phone tree.
Right. You need a way to say, I'll take the north block, you take the south block. If you have high trust, strong norms, and efficient networks, those gears turn smoothly and you crush the free rider problem.
I always try to map these grand economic theories onto incredibly mundane daily situations. To me, this is exactly like trying to organize a group dinner with 10 friends at a restaurant.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
It sounds trivial, but it's a perfect microcosm of the collective action problem.
Okay.
If you don't trust that people will actually show up on time, or if you don't trust that they will fairly split the bill at the end without arguing over who had the extra glass of wine, the cost of organizing the dinner feels way too high.
The risk of sitting there alone with a massive check is too scary.
Exactly. So you don't even bother making the reservation. You just stay home and order takeout.
That micro-level analogy translates perfectly to the macro level. Now, scale that group dinner up to a society of millions of citizens.
Okay.
Every single time you are faced with a decision about civic engagement, whether to join a social movement, pay your monthly dues to a local workers' club, or stand in the freezing rain at a political protest, your brain is running a complex calculation.
You're doing the group dinner math.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are asking, do other people care about this as much as I do? And if they do care, will they actually show up? You are constantly scanning your environment, gathering data to make that calculation.
And this is the crucial bridge for you, the listeners, sitting on that couch with your phone. The media you consume is the pipeline delivering that exact data directly into your brain.
It absolutely is.
Your news feed, your television shows, your podcasts,
Yeah.
they're constantly broadcasting signals about what other people care about, what they're currently doing, and whether they're going to show up to the metaphorical group dinner of society.
Which brings us to a brilliant theoretical blueprint mapped out in the research. In 2020, economists Salvador Barbera and Matthew Jackson developed a mathematical model to explain the exact mechanics of how this media pipeline impacts our decision to join a cause.
Oh, I love a good structural framework. Let's unpack this.
They essentially deconstructed the media's influence into three distinct pillars.
Okay, what are the three pillars?
The first pillar is content. This deals with the eternal tug of war between information and entertainment.
Got it.
The second pillar is coordination, which looks at how media technologies lower the logistical friction of communicating with a large crowd.
Like the group chat.
Exactly. And the third pillar is homophily, which is the academic term for the echo chamber effect, our deep-seated psychological tendency to connect exclusively with people who share our exact worldview.
Content, coordination, and homophily. Let's isolate that first pillar, content. How does the Barbara and Jackson model explain the tug of war between information and entertainment? Because, let's be honest, human beings are wired to seek out entertainment. We want to be amused.
We absolutely do. But we have to remember that human attention is a strictly finite resource.
Right. There are only 24 hours in a day.
To understand the Barbera and Jackson model, we need to translate their mathematical equations into behavioral logic. Let's imagine you are a citizen with a high baseline interest in a specific collective action.
Like what?
Say, organizing a community push to clean up a heavily polluted local river. You care deeply about this, but you are sitting in your living room and you have no idea if anyone else in your town cares. The media you consume acts as a radar system feeding you signals.
So if I open my local newspaper or pull up a local news blog and I see a front page article about the river pollution and maybe an op-ed from a neighbor who is angry about it, that is a signal.
That is a very specific type of signal. The model calls that a high participation signal.
High participation.
Right. It provides relevant information that validates your internal interest. Your confidence goes up. You subconsciously calculate, okay, society cares about this issue. If I organize a meeting, I won't be standing in an empty room.
And then I decide to participate. The media has successfully facilitated collective action.
Precisely.
But what if I don't see that article? What if the media technology I'm using is designed to constantly feed me something entirely different?
This is where the model gets incredibly insightful. What happens if the media is broadcasting what we call low participation signals?
Like what?
Think about a television lineup consisting entirely of sitcoms, reality dating shows, or an algorithmic feed of viral dance videos. According to Barbera and Jackson, this doesn't just fail to help collective action, it actively, insidiously suppresses it.
Wait. I want to make sure I am fully grasping the mechanics here. Are you saying that just witnessing other people engaging in mindless entertainment makes my brain subconsciously conclude that nobody gives a damn about the serious issues?
That is the core mathematical deduction of the rational actor. Think about your calculation regarding the river cleanup. If you turn on your screen and see that the media environment is absolutely saturated with trivial entertainment, you logically deduce that everyone else in your town is currently at home sitting on their couches watching that same entertainment.
And if they're watching reality TV, they are definitively not going to put on boots and wade into a polluted river on a Saturday morning.
Exactly. It fundamentally alters the calculus of cooperation.
That is a staggering perspective shift. The traditional way we think about this is that I am too distracted by streaming shows to go to the community meeting. I am blaming my own laziness.
Right, personal failing.
But the model says it's deeper than that. It's that my consumption of entertainment signals to me that you are too busy watching shows, so I determine the collective action is doomed to fail, and I don't go. It's not just a distraction, it's a social forecast.
It's a brilliant way to put it. The effectiveness of media in spreading relevant information can be a massive multiplier for collective action. But if that critical information is drowned out, if it is flooded by a tsunami of entertainment, the entire system of civic participation stalls out. The free rider problem wins.
Okay, the theoretical logic is ironclad. But, I'm always skeptical of elegant theories until I see the hard receipts.
Sure.
I want to know how this actually manifests in the real world, across different cultures and decades. And the Compunti framework delivers a massive data drop to address exactly this.
Oh, it really does.
We are looking at an incredibly broad analysis of 36 OECD countries over the 30-year period, from roughly 1990 to 2020. They are tracking the media habits and civic behaviors of nearly 200,000 individuals.
It is a sweeping panoramic view of how two monumental technological shocks, the golden age of television and the rise of the internet, rippled through the social fabric of the developed world.
For the listener, I want to construct a visual aid in your mind. We're going to build a chart that economists call a forest plot.
Okay.
Imagine a solid vertical line running right down the middle of your field of vision. That line represents the zero mark, meaning a technology has absolutely zero effect on social capital.
Right, completely neutral.
If a data point lands to the left of that vertical line, it means the technology is actively destroying social capital. It's making us less cooperative. If it lands to the right of the line, it means it is building social capital. It's bringing us together. When the researchers plotted the data for TV penetration over those 3 decades, where did it land?
The television data point sits slightly but firmly to the left of the zero line. Across these 36 countries, heavy TV consumption has a weak but undeniably negative correlation with overall social capital.
Which perfectly validates the Barbera and Jackson model we just discussed. Television historically was primarily a one-way entertainment engine.
Right.
It pumped out those low participation signals. It told us everyone else was sitting at home. But what happens when we look at the internet? Because the internet isn't just a passive screen, it's a two-way communication tool.
If you take a superficial approach and just plot general internet penetration on the forest plot, the data point sits clearly to the right of the zero line. It appears to have a robust, positive effect on building social capital.
So we can pack it up and go home. The internet is the savior of society, and television was the villain.
If only economics were that simple.
Yeah, right.
The true brilliance of this analysis is that the researchers didn't treat the internet as a single, static monolith. They recognized a fundamental paradigm shift that occurred roughly halfway through that 30-year window.
Oh, I see.
They split the timeline in two. They isolated the pre-social media internet, think the late 90s and early 2000s, the era of static web pages, email listservs, and clunky text-based message boards.
Oh man, the dial-up days.
Exactly. Then they compared it to the post-social media internet, defined by the meteoric rise of algorithmic platforms, the big social feeds and eventually algorithmic video feeds.
I have a theory about this. If the early web was mostly text and highly intentional, I bet it was a powerhouse for organization. What happens when you split the data?
Well, what's fascinating here is that your theory is spot on. The big reveal of the paper is that the positive effect of the internet on overall social capital is almost entirely driven by the pre-social media era.
Really?
Yeah, that specific data point sits way off to the right of our vertical line. It was an unprecedented boon for collective action. But when you plot the data for the post-social media era, well, the point crashes backward, right back to the zero line.
Wow.
The positive effect completely evaporates.
That is just wild to think about. We look
Yeah.
back at the early web, the dial-up tones, the terrible graphics, the basic forms, and it feels so primitive. But structurally, it was a pure, unadulterated tool for information and coordination.
It was very utilitarian.
Right. If you wanted to save the local river, you used a search engine to find a local environmental group, you read their static manifesto, and you sent an email to the organizer to find out what time they were meeting on Saturday. There was very little friction, but also very little distraction.
It lowered the logistical cost of coordination to almost zero. But crucially, it did not trap you in an infinite loop of algorithmic distraction. You got the information, and then you logged off and went to the meeting.
Right, because there was nothing else to do on that website.
Exactly. The modern algorithmic social web introduced a completely different architecture. It created a hybrid beast hyper-coordination mixed with infinite personalized entertainment and, as we will discuss later, extreme homophily.
A dangerous mix.
That combination effectively pumped the brakes on the very collective action that the technology theoretically should have accelerated.
We have to be careful with our definitions here, though. Social capital is a massive umbrella term. It covers everything from voting, to trusting your neighbor, to joining a bowling league. And the researchers didn't just leave their analysis at that zoomed-out macro level.
No, they didn't.
They took out the scalpel and dissected what the word participation actually means in the real world. And the results of this dissection are a total mind-bender.
They reveal a fascinating paradox. Because when you look closely at the post-social media era, it doesn't just uniformly flatten all types of human activity. It doesn't make us universally apathetic. Instead, it radically alters the flavor and the depth of our participation.
Okay, how did they measure that?
The researchers broke this down by analyzing 4 distinct panels of data. First, total membership in civic organizations. Second, formal party or union membership. Third, political activity, which they define as things like signing a digital petition or attending a lawful demonstration. And finally, generalized political interest.
So we are looking at a spectrum of effort. On one end, you have simple interest. You read the news and have opinions. In the middle, you have activity. You might click a button to sign a petition or go to a one-off rally. And on the far end, you have deep commitment. You're paying monthly dues to a labor union, attending weekly strategy meetings, and carrying a membership card.
That's the spectrum, yes.
How did the dawn of the algorithmic social media era affect this spectrum?
We see a profound and undeniable divergence. Today's internet dramatically increases what sociologists might call weak or shallow participation.
Meaning, I am highly engaged with political news on my feed, I have very strong opinions, and I will absolutely add my name to a digital petition or maybe even show up to a protest this weekend if the hashtag is trending.
Exactly. Those specific data points, political interest, and episodic political activity shoot straight upward. The barrier to entry for expressing a civic opinion or clicking a support button has never been lower in human history. But at the exact same time, on the other end of the spectrum, the data shows that the social media era actively decreases deep, long-term civic commitments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the statistical likelihood of a citizen formally joining a political party or dedicating years to becoming a structural member of a union drops significantly.
I find this finding so compelling because it mirrors our daily psychological reality so perfectly. I keep thinking about this as the difference between swiping on a dating app and sustaining a 30-year marriage.
That is a very apt analogy.
Social media lowers the barrier to entry for civic engagement so close to the floor that we get this constant daily sugar rush of shallow action. You retweet a noble cause, you share an infographic on your story, you feel a little hit of dopamine, you feel like you did something to help the world.
Right, the illusion of action.
But the infinite scroll of highly optimized entertainment sitting right beneath that retweet raises the opportunity cost of doing the actual unglamorous work. It makes the idea of sitting in a boring 3-hour town hall meeting on a random Wednesday night feel like an unbearable burden.
That is a highly perceptive way to frame the behavioral shift. The frictionless convenience of the digital world makes the necessary friction of the physical world feel intolerable.
Intolerable.
Yeah. Why spend 6 months slowly building a coalition in your local community, navigating difficult personalities and bureaucratic red tape, when you can just launch a hashtag campaign in 5 seconds and get immediate global validation?
Exactly.
The structural problem for society is that deep systemic change almost always requires those boring 3-hour town hall meetings. It requires the durable, long-term institutional commitments that the data shows are currently being eroded.
This erosion of deep commitment leads us directly into what I consider the most fascinating contradiction in the entire paper. Because everything we've unpacked so far paints social media as this superficial, slightly alienating force that keeps us off the streets and glued to our screens.
Yeah.
But when the researchers pivoted to measure interpersonal trust, which, let's be honest, is the absolute bedrock of any functioning society, the data did something completely unexpected.
It produced a major anomaly. Let's return to our mental forest plot. When we look at heavy television penetration, we see a distinct negative correlation with trusting strangers.
Okay.
The more TV a society consumes, the more cynical or fearful people become of their neighbors.
Which tracks logically. If your daily diet of local news is just a constant curated stream of, if it bleeds, it leads, crime stories and sensationalized danger, you are naturally going to lock your doors, install a security camera, and view the people walking down your street with suspicion.
But then we look at the data for social media. Given the steep decline in deep civic membership and local organization we just discussed, you would logically expect social media to absolutely decimate interpersonal trust.
Right, you'd think we'd be total shut-ins who hate everyone.
You would expect us to be more alienated than ever. But strangely, the empirical data shows a massive positive spike in generalized trust associated with the social media era.
I need you to reconcile this for me. How is it mathematically or psychologically possible that social media decreases my willingness to join my neighborhood association, but simultaneously makes me trust the people in my neighborhood more?
To unravel this paradox, we have to look closely at how different technological mediums interact with human psychology. The researchers point to a deeply revealing 2019 experiment conducted by economist Fabio Antocci and his colleagues.
Okay.
They wanted to move beyond just tracking time spent online and test how the actual quality of online interactions affects our baseline trust in humanity.
How do you ethically and accurately test the quality of someone's internet experience?
They designed a highly controlled environment. They took over 400 active Facebook users and brought them into a lab setting. They randomly assigned these users to view completely different simulated news feeds.
Oh, wow.
One group was exposed to a feed heavily curated to feature highly uncivil comments on divisive political topics, the classic toxic internet flame war, full of insults and bad faith arguments.
The worst parts of the internet.
Exactly. A second, control group saw neutral, mundane discussions. But the third group was exposed to a feed curated to show healthy, civil, constructive online discussions. People respectfully disagreeing, sharing resources, and finding common ground.
Okay, so you prime their brains with 3 different versions of the internet. Then what?
After this exposure period, they had all the participants play a standard behavioral economics exercise known as a trust game.
A trust game.
Yeah. In this game, you are given real money, and you have to decide whether to risk that money by transferring it to a completely anonymous stranger, trusting that the stranger will share the generated profits with you fairly, rather than just keeping it all for themselves. It is a pure test of your baseline faith in an unseen human being.
Let me theorize here. The people reading the toxic flame wars probably hoarded their money, assuming everyone is a jerk. But did the people reading the polite discussions actually risk their cash?
You nailed the underlying dynamic. Unsurprisingly, the group exposed to the uncivil flame wars showed no improvement in trust, and in many cases, their willingness to trust plummeted.
Sure. But the people exposed to the civil, constructive online discussions showed a statistically significant increase in their baseline trust. Their willingness to hand over real money to a total stranger went up, simply because they had just witnessed evidence that people can be reasonable and cooperative on the internet.
That is so counterintuitive to the dominant cultural narrative. All we hear constantly is how toxic the internet is, how it's a cesspool of hatred. But I guess we completely take for granted the sheer, overwhelming volume of mundane, positive human interaction that happens online every single second.
It is an issue of disproportionate visibility. The toxicity goes viral, but the mundane positivity is the background radiation of the web.
The background radiation.
Right. Even if social media doesn't inspire you to run for local city council, the sheer unprecedented exposure to diverse human experiences has a profound psychological effect. Think about what a smartphone allows you to do. You can watch a day in the life of someone living in a radically different country. You can watch a stranger share an incredibly vulnerable story about overcoming illness. Yeah, that happens all the time.
You can participate in a highly niche hobby forum where people from 6 continents help each other fix vintage watches.
Television was a one-way, highly curated broadcast that often highlighted the frightening anomalies of the world. The internet, for all its glaring algorithmic flaws, is a multi-directional window that constantly reinforces the fact that most people everywhere are just regular folks trying to get by and find a little joy.
Precisely. The sheer volume of that exposure can foster a generalized, abstract sense of empathy and trust. So the paradox resolves itself into a trade-off. We trust humanity a bit more in the abstract global sense, but we are less willing to commit to the specific, grinding, physical work of local organizing.
Trading deep local bonds for shallow global empathy.
Yes, exactly.
This brings us back to the mechanics of how we spend our time. I want to pivot back to the first pillar of the Barbarian-Jackson model content. We touched on the idea of entertainment distracting us, but the researchers formalized this as Mechanism 1, the crowding out effect. I want to really drill down into how economists actually prove this effect in practice, rather than just relying on theory.
To visualize the crowding out effect, let's imagine a physical scale, like the scales of justice.
Okay.
On the left side of the scale, you have public information. This is the heavy, nutritious content news about your local city council budget, updates on union negotiations, details about an upcoming school board race.
They're vegetable.
The vegetables, right. On the right side of the scale, you have entertainment. This is the highly palatable content, blockbuster movies, live sports, viral comedy sketches.
And because, as we established, human attention is a strict zero-sum game, if you start piling heavy weights onto the entertainment side of the scale, the public information side inevitably gets physically lifted up, pushed out of focus, and marginalized.
Exactly, it gets crowded out. Your brain literally does not have the bandwidth to process the local budget while watching a gripping drama.
Right.
Now, proving this empirically is a monumental challenge for economists. You can't just conduct a survey and ask people, hey, did watching the game make you forget about the mayoral race?
Because people lie.
People are terrible at self-reporting their own cognitive lapses. You have to find natural experiments in the real world. And one of the most elegant examples cited in this framework is a 2009 study by economist Benjamin Olken, who looked at the introduction of television in Indonesia.
This study blew my mind. The methodology is so creative. Let's walk the listener through exactly how an economist tries to prove that TV destroys social participation. Because if I were trying to prove this, my first instinct would be to just grab a clipboard, walk into a town, and compare the civic habits of families who own a television against the families who don't own a television. Wouldn't that give you the data?
That is the instinct of a layperson, but it is the ultimate trap for an economist. If you do that, you run headfirst into what we call omitted variable bias.
Okay, I need an ELI 5 explained, like I'm 5 for omitted variable bias.
Imagine you are trying to figure out if eating ice cream causes people to drown. You look at the data and you see that on days when ice cream sales spike, drowning deaths also spike. So you conclude ice cream is deadly.
That sounds reasonable until you think about it.
Right, because you omitted a massive invisible variable, the weather. On hot summer days, people buy more ice cream, and they also go swimming more often, leading to more drownings. The ice cream didn't cause the drowning, the heat caused both.
So in the case of television?
In the case of television, especially in developing nations in the 90s and 2000s, who owns a TV? Wealthier families.
Right.
And wealth is a massive omitted variable. Wealthier families might already participate less in community labor sharing because they can afford to hire help, or they might participate more in formal politics because they have higher education.
I see.
If you just compare TV owners to non-owners, You aren't measuring the impact of the screen, you are just measuring the impact of being rich. You haven't proven cause and effect.
So how do you isolate the screen? You need a scenario where the assignment of who gets to watch TV is completely randomized, like a lottery.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't exactly run a randomized controlled trial for millions of people across a whole country.
You can't. But Olkin realized that in the rugged volcanic terrain of Indonesia, Mother Nature had already run the perfect randomized experiment for him.
All this is so cool.
He used the physical topography of the mountains. Television signals, especially analog broadcasts from that era, required a direct line of sight from the transmitter tower to the antenna.
Okay.
If your village happened to be located in the geographic shadow of a mountain relative to the nearest broadcasting tower, your signal was blocked. You got terrible reception, or you got nothing but static.
Purely by geographical accident. It had nothing to do with how wealthy the village was or how politically engaged they were. The mountain didn't care. It was a completely random lottery of geography.
Exactly. So Olkin could look at two villages that were economically and culturally identical, maybe just a few miles apart. But one had a clear line of sight to the tower, and the other was blocked by a mountain.
So the village in the mountain's shadow became the perfect, naturally occurring control group.
Yes, exactly.
That is the ultimate workaround. It is absolute genius. So when he compared the village with the soap operas to the village with the static, what did the data show?
The results were definitive and stark. In the villages that had a clear line of sight and could receive uninterrupted TV signals, there was a massive, statistically significant drop in participation in local neighborhood associations, religious study groups, and community school committees.
Wow.
The sudden introduction of highly engaging national soap operas and variety shows literally hollowed out the civic life of the village. The entertainment completely crowded out the time and the mental energy that was previously devoted to local collective action.
It is the exact phenomenon Robert Putnam described in his famous book, Bowling Alone. The idea that the rise of TV in America killed off local bowling leagues and civic clubs. But Putnam's theory was often criticized as nostalgic. Olkin actually proved the mechanics of it using topographical satellite data in the mountains of Indonesia.
He proved the mechanics of the zero-sum attention game, and the Kimpante framework is quick to point out that this isn't just a historical relic of the analog television age. We are experiencing the exact same crowding out effect right now with modern smartphones. To prove this, they highlight a 2020 study by economist Hunt Alcott and his team.
The Facebook deactivation study.
Right. If Olkin used a natural mountain to block TV, Alcott used a massive budget to artificially block social media.
Oh, wow.
He orchestrated a modern equivalent of the Indonesian study. They recruited thousands of active Facebook users in the United States and literally paid a random subset of them to completely deactivate their Facebook accounts for an entire month in the lead up to a major election.
Paid them to log off.
Yes. And they didn't just take their word for it, they rigorously verified the deactivations. So they knew for an absolute fact that these specific people were cut off from the algorithmic feed.
Let me hypothesize on this one. If you pay someone to get off Facebook for a month, human nature abhors a vacuum. I would assume they just migrate that exact same screen time over to Twitter or TikTok, or they just watch more Netflix. They just replace one digital distraction with another.
That is a very logical assumption, and it is exactly what the researchers were terrified of finding.
Right.
If they just switched to Twitter, the experiment would be useless for measuring social capital. But the aggregate data showed something far more profound. While some users certainly shifted to other digital media, the deactivated group as a whole spent significantly more time physically hanging out with their friends and family.
Really?
Yeah, they reported higher levels of subjective well-being and more time spent in face-to-face social activities. The platform hadn't just been replacing other media, it had been actively crowding out their real-world interpersonal relationships.
So we aren't just bowling alone anymore. We are scrolling alone.
We really are.
The underlying technology evolves from cathode ray tubes to OLED touchscreens, but the biological limits of human attention remain exactly the same.
And this crowding out effect has incredibly severe consequences when we turn our attention to the ultimate test of civic participation. If entertainment crowds out our willingness to join a neighborhood watch or have dinner with friends, what does it do to our most fundamental democratic duty?
That brings us to a critical inflection point: content and the ballot box. If entertainment is absorbing all the time we used to spend reading up on local issues, what happens on the one day a year we are legally asked to participate?
The paper traces the relationship between media technology and voting through through three distinct historical shifts. And the pattern that emerges is incredibly revealing. Let's start with the rollout of television in the United States, which was heavily analyzed by Matthew Ginskow in a landmark 2006 study. He looked at the massive societal shift between 1950 and 1990.
The absolute golden age of broadcasting, the era of three major networks dominating the national conversation.
Exactly. And Genskow found that as television sets rapidly entered living rooms across America, there was a steep, precipitous drop in voter turnout specifically for local elections, mayoral races, city councils, school boards.
Why?
Because the introduction of TV caused a massive disruption in how people consumed information. People stopped reading their local daily newspapers. Those newspapers were dense, text-heavy, and rich in granular information about the local town council. Instead, they swapped them for the national evening news broadcasts and primetime entertainment. Television, by its very economic nature, is heavily tilted toward national audiences. It is broad.
You can't effectively vote for a city council member if you literally don't know their name or what they stand for, because you've spent the last 6 months watching national sitcoms instead of reading the local metro section.
Right.
The information required to execute the collective action of voting was crowded out.
That is the exact mechanism. Now, let's fast forward a few decades and look at the rollout of broadband internet in the United Kingdom, studied by Alessandro Gavazza and his colleagues in 2019.
Okay, another methodological deep dive. Because again, you need a randomized variable to see who gets high-speed internet first. You can't just measure early adopters in wealthy neighborhoods in London, because we run right back into omitted variable bias. Wealthy people vote more. So how did Gavazza randomize internet access in the UK?
He found an instrumental variable that is almost poetic in its simplicity. He used the weather. Specifically, he used historical rainfall data.
Wait, how on earth does the amount of rain dictate the speed of your internet connection?
It has to do with the physical infrastructure of early broadband. In the UK, early high-speed internet was delivered by upgrading the existing legacy copper telephone wires. But heavy, frequent rainfall physically degrades copper infrastructure over time. It creates microscopic faults and water damage in the lines. So, in geographic areas of the UK that historically received higher intensity rainfall, the existing copper network was in much worse physical shape.
Oh, wow.
It was significantly more expensive and technically difficult for telecom companies to upgrade those degraded lines to support fast broadband. The historical rain patterns created a natural, completely randomized lottery of who got high-speed internet first.
I am continually astounded by the creativity of economists, using decades of weather patterns as a proxy for digital infrastructure to predict voting behavior. That is wild.
It really is.
So what happened in the drier areas that got the fast broadband internet early?
History repeated itself. The exact same dynamic that Genskow observed with television in the 50s happened with broadband in the 2000s. Yeah, the arrival of fast internet decimated local newspaper consumption in the UK. People went online, and they gravitated toward massive national news portals, global sports sites, and online entertainment. The local information diet evaporated, and as a direct, measurable result, local electoral turnout dropped significantly in the areas with the fastest internet. The crowding out effect struck again, just on a faster network.
If we stop the analysis right there, the narrative is incredibly bleak. TV kills local voting. The internet kills local voting. We are doomed to be a society of highly entertained, completely uninformed non-voters.
Yeah.
But the framework includes a third historical case study that introduces a massive plot twist.
Yes, it does. The researchers look at the work of Felipe Campante himself, studying a 20-year period of internet expansion in Italy from 1994 to roughly 2013. And what he documented was essentially a two-act play.
Okay.
In Act 1, the short term, the internet in Italy did exactly what it did in the UK and what TV did in America. It crowded out dense political information with entertainment, disillusioned the voter base, and suppressed electoral turnout.
The familiar story. The screen makes everyone stay home.
But then Act 2 begins. Over a longer time horizon, the internet in Italy caused a massive remobilization of voters.
Remobilization. Why?
Because the technology matured and human behavior adapted. A wave of new political entrepreneurs realized the structural power of the web. Historically, the Italian media landscape was heavily gatekept by established political elites and massive broadcast networks. If you were an outsider, you couldn't get on TV.
Right.
But the internet removed the gatekeepers. These new political actors used blogs, online forums, and eventually algorithmic social media to directly reach those disenchanted voters who had tuned out of the mainstream.
They use the exact same screens that caused the apathy to cure the apathy.
Precisely. They provided highly targeted, relevant political information, organized massive grassroots meetups online, and pulled millions of citizens back into the political process, eventually birthing entirely new, formidable political parties in Italy.
The overarching takeaway here is so vital for how we view the future. The physical technology itself, the glowing screen, the fiber optic cable, the satellite in orbit, is not destiny. A screen does not inherently make a human being apathetic. The behavioral outcome depends entirely on the diet of content that the technology is serving you, and crucially, who holds the power to serve it.
That is the perfect synthesis of the content pillar. If the media diet is optimized for pure, frictionless entertainment, you will inevitably disengage from the friction of civic life. But if the diet shifts to deliver highly relevant, actionable political information, you can mobilize a population faster than ever before in human history. The technology is just an amplifier for the content.
Let's shift gears from what we consume to how we act. We've exhaustively covered the first pillar, how media provides the information to help us decide if we should participate. But the second pillar of the Barbera and Jackson model is coordination. Mechanism 2 is all about how media technologies lower the logistical costs of how we actually pull off a collective action, the coordination catalyst.
To truly unpack the power of coordination, we need to separate it into two distinct buckets: direct coordination and indirect coordination. They function very differently, but both are revolutionized by modern media.
Direct coordination is the easier one to wrap my head around. It's the logistics. It's the group chat. It is sending a massive WhatsApp blast that says, "Hey everyone, we are meeting at the north gate of the town square at 5:00 p.m. Wear red, bring a sign, and bring water."
Exactly. It is the literal physical logistics of moving thousands of human bodies through space and time, and the economic data reveals that mobile technology has been an absolute earthquake in this regard. Let's look at a 2020 study by Manacorda and Tesse. They don't look at smartphones. They looked at the spread of basic 2G mobile phones across the continent of Africa over a 14-year period from 1998 to 2012.
This is a crucial distinction. We aren't talking about algorithmic feeds or Twitter hashtags or TikTok trends. We are talking about the era of the plastic flip phone, SMS text messaging, and basic voice calls.
Pure, unfiltered, peer-to-peer communication. Manacorda and Tesse found that the rapid penetration of these simple 2G phones allowed citizens to effectively organize and coordinate massive anti-government protests. The technology provided the logistical backbone for large-scale collective action. But their data revealed a fascinating caveat. This technological mobilization primarily happened only during times of severe economic recession.
Let me puzzle through that.
Yeah.
Why would the phones only work as a protest tool when the economy is tanking? Does it have to do with the opportunity costs we talked about earlier?
You are connecting the dots perfectly. Think about the underlying economic conditions of the citizens. During a period of strong economic growth, the opportunity cost of attending a protest is incredibly high. You have a stable job, you have a shift to work, you have wages to earn. Skipping work to protest is a massive financial risk.
Right.
But during a severe recession, unemployment skyrockets, wages stagnate, and grievances against the government are at an all-time high. The cost of taking a Tuesday off to march in the streets drops to almost zero, because you might not have a job to go to anyway.
So the technology didn't magically create the anger. The recession created the anger.
Exactly. The 2G phones were not persuasion machines. They didn't convince a happy person to be mad, but they provided the essential direct coordination tool to solve the free rider problem. They allowed Citizen A to text Citizen B and say, "I am furious about the economy and I am willing to protest. Are you?"
And when they text back,
When Citizen B replies, "Yes, let's meet at the Capitol tomorrow," the free rider risk is mitigated. You have confirmed that others share your preference and are willing to act.
tying this back to our theoretical model, the text message allows them to verify the high state of collective interest that Barbera and Jackson mathematically predicted. It gives them the confidence to step out the door.
Precisely. Now, if basic 2G text messaging can facilitate national protests, what happens when you upgrade from SMS to a fully integrated algorithmic social network? The coordination power doesn't just increase linearly, it becomes exponential.
Right.
And this brings us to one of the most sophisticated, mathematically elegant studies in this entire framework. And Nikolpov and his team's 2020 analysis of the Russian social network, VKontakte.
VKontakte, or VK for short. For listeners unfamiliar, it is functionally the Facebook of Russia. It dominates the social media landscape there.
Yes. And the researchers set out to answer a very specific, highly debated question. Did the penetration of VK actually cause the massive wave of political protests in Russia in 2011?
Okay.
But immediately, the researchers slammed into the economist's nightmare omitted variable bias.
Because if you just look at a map and say, hey, the cities with the most VK users have the biggest protests, you haven't proven anything. Maybe the cities that adopt new social networks early are just inherently more liberal or have a younger demographic or have a deeper history of anti-government sentiment. How do you prove the network itself caused the mobilization?
You need a mountain in Indonesia. You need rainfall in the UK. You need a natural experiment. And the solution Nikolapov's team found is nothing short of brilliant.
Okay, what was it?
They looked closely at the biography of the founder of vKontakte, a man named Pavel Durov. Durov studied at St. Petersburg State University in the early 2000s. The researchers hypothesized a fundamental rule of network growth. When you launch a brand new social platform from your dorm room, the very first people you invite to test it are your immediate real-world friends.
Right, your college buddies.
And college students naturally tend to invite their old high school friends from their respective hometowns.
Oh, this is incredible. I see where this is going.
The economists literally tracked down the specific hometowns of Pavel Durov's actual college classmates. They mapped out where these students grew up across Russia. They then used those specific cities as an instrumental variable.
Okay, we need to pause and define that term. Instrumental variable sounds incredibly dry, but it's basically an economist's holy grail. Let me try an ELI 5 here. An instrumental variable is like finding a cheat code in the data. It's a completely random third factor that heavily influences the thing you are studying, in this case, early adoption of VK, but has absolutely zero logical connection to the final outcome you are measuring, which is political anger. By using the hometowns of a few random college kids, they found a variable that forces a spike in social media use, but has nothing to do with whether that city hates the government.
That is a perfect explanation. It is a completely arbitrary geographic lottery based solely on where a few dozen college students happen to grow up. The researchers used this cheat code to isolate the pure effect of the network. And when they ran the numbers, the cities that received those early random injections of VK users due to Durov's classmates experienced significantly larger, more highly organized protests in 2011 compared to identical cities that didn't have that early network advantage.
They proved undeniable cause and effect using the founder's address book.
They did. But here is the most crucial, nuanced finding of that entire study. The presence of the VK network did not change the baseline political opinions of the users. When the researchers looked at survey data, having VK didn't make a citizen any more likely to express disapproval of the government in a private poll.
So just like the 2G phones in Africa, the social network wasn't a persuasion machine. It wasn't radicalizing people who were otherwise content.
Exactly. It was a pure engine of coordination. The political grievance, the anger was already simmering beneath the surface. The network simply provided the frictionless logistical scaffolding required to transform private, isolated grievance into massive, public, collective action. It solved the free rider problem at a national scale.
I need to jump in here with a quick but very important note for our listeners. We are discussing hard economic data surrounding political protests in Russia, and in a moment, we're going to be discussing data regarding other highly sensitive, tragic historical events. As always on this deep dive, we're looking strictly at the math. We're impartially reporting the empirical findings of these economic researchers and how they model the mechanics of human behavior. We are not taking any political stance on the protests themselves or endorsing any specific worldview. Our lens today is entirely focused on the raw mechanics of how humans use media to coordinate.
That neutrality is essential, especially as we move into the next phase of the research. Because if we connect the mechanics of coordination to the broader scope of human history, we arrive at a deeply sobering reality. Coordination is nothing more than a tool. And tools have no inherent morality.
Right.
A hammer is incredibly efficient at driving a nail to build a shelter, but it is equally efficient at shattering a window. Media technologies can coordinate a neighborhood bake sale, a democratic movement, or they can coordinate atrocities.
Which brings us to the darkest, but perhaps most vital section of this framework, the dark side of coordination. Because social capital is generally framed as a positive good. But the researchers explicitly define the concept of destructive social capital.
Yes. When a group of people successfully overcomes the free rider problem, builds trust and networks, and executes a collective action that is specifically designed to harm, oppress, or eradicate another group that is destructive social capital in action.
That's chilling.
It is. And the Campante paper highlights two devastating empirical studies to illustrate this. The first is David Yanagisawa-Drott's 2014 economic analysis of the 1994 Rwanda genocide.
This is a heavy, profoundly tragic historical event to view through the lens of economics. How did he study this?
During the genocide, a specific radio station, RTLM, broadcast horrific, vitriolic hate speech targeting the Tutsi minority. But Yanagisawa-Drott wanted to understand the exact mechanical role the radio played during the violence. He employed a topographical methodology very similar to the Orkan television study in Indonesia. He mapped the physical propagation of the RTLM radio signal as it traveled over the highly mountainous, rugged terrain of Rwanda. By analyzing the signal strength, he could determine which villages received clear broadcasts and which were located in radio shadows.
And what would the geographical data reveal about the violence?
He found that villages with clearer radio reception experienced significantly higher rates of violence. But the crucial nuance is how the violence manifested. The data indicated that the broadcasts were uniquely effective at spurring collective acts of violence, meaning coordinated, organized attacks perpetrated by large groups rather than isolated individual acts of violence.
I see.
The economic analysis suggests that while the radio certainly spread hateful persuasion, its most lethal function was providing literal, real-time logistical coordination. The broadcasts were transmitting locations, coordinating movements, and giving tactical instructions to groups of perpetrators.
It was an evil, weaponized application of the exact same direct coordination mechanics we just talked about with the text messages in Africa or the social network in Russia. It was the dark inverse of the group chat.
It is the exact same mechanical gear, turning in the opposite direction. And we see this dark coordination seamlessly map onto modern digital media as well. The framework cites a 2020 study by Leonardo Brustin and his colleagues, which returned to the Russian social network VK. Using that same college classmate instrumental variable methodology to isolate the random growth of the network, they found a chilling correlation. Higher social media penetration in a specific city was empirically linked to a measurable rise in collective hate crimes against ethnic minorities in that city.
Again, the digital network drastically lowers the friction of finding other individuals who share your darkest, most destructive preferences. It provides the trust and the networks required to organize a violent collective action that an individual would likely be too afraid to attempt on their own due to the free rider problem or fear of consequence.
Yes. And that fear of consequence brings us to the second and arguably more insidious bucket of coordination, indirect coordination. If direct coordination is a WhatsApp group planning a rally, indirect coordination is much more subtle. It is about fundamentally altering what an entire population believes is socially acceptable.
It's not about changing the logistics, it's about changing the invisible rules of the game.
Precisely. In economics and sociology, these are referred to as second-order beliefs. It is not just about what you personally believe, it is about what you believe everyone else believes.
Okay.
To illustrate this, let's hypothesize an individual who harbors extreme, highly xenophobic views. In a healthy society, that individual usually keeps those views to themselves. Why? Because their second-order belief is that society at large will condemn them. The social cost of acting out the risk of being ostracized, losing their job, or being shunned by neighbors is simply too high.
The gears of social norms are working as intended, holding the destructive behavior in check.
Right. But what happens to the social calculus when a highly prominent public figure, a politician, a celebrity, a major influencer, uses mass media to loudly and unapologetically broadcast those exact same extreme views to millions of people?
Let me put myself in the shoes of that isolated individual. If I am sitting on my couch, harboring those dark thoughts, and suddenly I see the guy on television or the massive account on Twitter saying the exact same things, my entire reality shifts. I suddenly think, wait a minute, I'm not an isolated outlier. The guy with 10 million followers agrees with me. Maybe the silent majority actually thinks like this. Maybe the rules have changed, and it is now completely socially acceptable to say this out loud.
Exactly. The mass broadcast acts as a massive, invisible coordinating signal. There is no direct group chat. There is no logistical planning. But the signal tells all the isolated individuals across the country that the social norms have fundamentally shifted. The perceived cost of acting out has plummeted. The Campante framework cites compelling research analyzing hate crimes in both the United States and Germany, following heavily publicized anti-minority or anti-refuge posts by prominent political figures on social media. The resulting spikes in violence were not directly coordinated by the politicians. The perpetrators were usually isolated individuals or small, unconnected groups, but they were indirectly coordinated by the signal that their underlying prejudices were now acceptable or even endorsed by the wider group.
Bringing this strictly back to the Barbera and Jackson mathematical model, we started with the media broadcast, fundamentally changed the individual's perception of the high state of participation. He gave them the false, dangerous confidence that their extreme views were actually the majority view.
Which serves as the perfect logical transition into the third and final pillar of the model. Because we have to ask, why is the modern internet so incredibly efficient at giving people the false confidence that everyone agrees with them?
Yeah, why is that?
There is a specific engineered feature of the modern digital landscape that is designed to permanently distort your perception of reality.
This brings us to mechanism 3, homophily and filter bubbles. We defined it briefly at the top of the show, but let's really drill down into the psychology here. What exactly is homophily?
Homophily is essentially the scientific term for the old proverb, birds of a feather flock together. It describes our deeply ingrained biological confirmation bias. Human beings are psychologically uncomfortable with cognitive dissonance. We naturally, instinctively seek out information, communities, and individuals that validate our pre-existing beliefs, and we actively avoid or reject information that challenges us.
Right. If I'm a diehard fan of a specific sports team and they just lost a terrible game, I am absolutely not going to listen to a sports podcast hosted by their bitter rivals who are gloating about the win. That feels terrible. I'm going to seek out the podcast hosted by fans of my team so we can complain together and tell each other why the referees were biased. Want the comfort of agreement.
And it is vital to acknowledge that human beings have always done this. It is not a new phenomenon. In the 20th century, you subscribed to the physical newspaper that broadly aligned with your political leanings. If you had the means, you physically moved to a neighborhood populated by people of similar socioeconomic status or cultural background.
Sure.
But the massive algorithmic shift of the last 15 years has taken this natural, manageable human flaw and supercharged it into something structurally dangerous.
Because the algorithm has no moral compass. Its only objective, its only programmed goal is to keep my eyeballs on the app for as many seconds as possible so it can serve me more ads. And the engineers know that the easiest way to keep me engaged is to keep me psychologically comfortable. So the algorithm feeds my natural homophily back to me on steroids, it learns what I like, and it ruthlessly filters out everything else.
Exactly. Let's return to the visual we built at the very beginning of the deep dive, the abstract network map floating in the dark.
Okay, I have it.
In a healthy, diverse network without strict homophily, the red nodes and the blue nodes are all mixed together in a chaotic web. They are constantly bumping into each other, talking to each other, and sharing conflicting information. But in a modern network, entirely driven by algorithmic homophily, the map physically reorganizes itself. All the red nodes get pulled tightly together into a dense clump on the left side of the room, and all the blue nodes get pulled into a dense clump on the right side.
I want to upgrade our metaphor here. Homophily isn't just birds flocking together. On the internet, it's like algorithmic gravity. Imagine a massive, crowded cocktail party where the physical floor is constantly tilting and shifting under your feet, physically sliding you toward the group of people who already agree with you, and simultaneously creating a giant, uncrossable chasm between you and anyone who might challenge your worldview. You end up trapped in a filter bubble.
That is a terrifyingly accurate visualization of the digital architecture. And this structural shift raises a profound question for economists and sociologists. What happens to the overall social capital of a democracy when its citizens only ever talk to digital clones of themselves?
Right.
To answer this, the researchers bring back Robert Putnam, the author of Bowling Alone. Putnam argued that social capital is not a monolith. It must be categorized into two distinct types: bonding social capital and bridging social capital.
Bonding and bridging. Okay, break down the difference between those two.
To visualize this, imagine human society is a vast archipelago made up of hundreds of different islands.
Sorry, islands.
Bonding social capital is the infrastructure built inside your specific island. It represents the roads connecting you to your immediate neighbors, your family, your church group, your specific political in-group.
Got it.
Bridging social capital, on the other hand, is the physical bridge constructed to connect your island to the neighboring island. The island populated by people who look different, pray differently, or vote differently than you do.
I can clearly see the collision course we are on here.
Algorithmic homophily and filter bubbles are absolute miracle workers for generating bonding social capital. Because you are constantly surrounded by people who violently agree with you, the internal roads on your ideological island become hyper-efficient, frictionless superhighways. Your specific in-group is highly energized and highly mobilized. As we discussed with the coordination mechanisms, you can organize a rally for your specific cause in a matter of minutes.
But there is always a but in economics.
But the algorithm achieves this hyper-efficiency by systematically blowing up the bridges to every other island. It actively, ruthlessly destroys bridging social capital. You never see the other side's perspective on your feed, except perhaps when it is presented as a ridiculous caricature designed to be mocked and outraged over.
Wow.
And the ultimate consequence of this unseen algorithmic homophily is that you become blindly, mathematically confident that everyone thinks exactly like us.
Because according to my screen, literally everyone in my world does think like me. The algorithm is actively hiding the rest of the world's complexity from me to keep me comfortable.
Exactly. And when the inhabitants of every single island believe that they are the undeniable, overwhelming majority, and they have absolutely no bridges left to communicate with the other islands well, the inevitable result is extreme party polarization, toxic tribalism, and a fundamental existential distrust of the outgroup. You no longer just disagree with your political opponents over tax policy. You view them as an alien, existential threat to your highly mobilized, hyper-bonded island.
Which brings this entire deep dive full circle. It perfectly explains the trust paradox we discussed an hour ago. It explains why our abstract, generalized trust in humanity might tick up due to seeing nice videos online, but our deep, functional civic engagement is fundamentally broken. We implicitly trust the people inside our algorithmic filter bubble. We will coordinate with them instantly. But because the bridges are gone, we have completely lost the muscular ability to sit in a physical town hall meeting and hammer out a boring, necessary compromise with someone from outside the bubble.
That is the ultimate hidden cost of algorithmic homophily. It weaponizes our deep biological desire for connection and turns it against our societal need for consensus. It makes us hyper-coordinated but entirely incapable of compromise.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today. To synthesize all of this, I want you, the listener, to visualize a giant control panel sitting in front of you. This is the master dashboard of our society's social capital. It has three massive, heavy dials on it, representing the three pillars of the Barbera-Jackson model we've unpacked today.
The first dial on the left is content. As a society, we can turn it toward public information, the heavy, necessary civic nutrition, or we can twist it all the way toward frictionless entertainment, crowding out our awareness of the real world.
The middle dial is coordination.
Yeah.
We can set it low, where organizing collective action is slow, physical, and expensive, or we can crank it all the way to high, where a single text message or trending hashtag can mobilize 1 million people in an afternoon, for better or for worse.
And the third dial on the right is networks. We can consciously set it to open, where information flows freely and uncomfortably between diverse groups, building bridges. Or we can crank it over to echo chamber, where algorithmic homophily rules, the filtered bubbles are sealed shut, and the bridges are destroyed.
The functional health of our society, our ability to solve massive existential global problems, depends entirely on where those three dials are set at any given moment.
And if there is one overarching takeaway from the entire body of economic research by Camponte, Durante, and Tesse, it is that media technology is strictly non-binary. A smartphone is not inherently evil, and the printing press was not universally good.
Right.
Technology is simply a flawless mirror and a massive amplifier of human nature. It amplifies our biological desire to be distracted by entertainment, it amplifies our urgent need to coordinate with each other, and it critically amplifies our fatal flaw of tribalism.
So the narrative that we are just helpless, passive victims of the algorithm isn't entirely true. We built the dials, and ultimately human choices are twisting them.
Exactly. But the researchers emphasize a critical need for future focus. We desperately need more rigorous research into algorithmic transparency and digital media literacy. As a society, we need to understand exactly how these massive tech platforms are adjusting those dials on our behalf, in the dark, often without our conscious knowledge. Only by understanding the mechanics of the machine can we design the policies and the personal habits required to build a cooperative, high-functioning society.
I think that is the perfect synthesis. And as we close out, I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative final thought to chew on, something that builds on the architecture we've just explored.
Let's hear it.
Right now, as we speak, the massive algorithms that dictate our digital reality, the code serving you videos, articles, and posts, are almost universally optimized for one single, blunt metric: engagement. Keep the user on the app. And as we've seen through the data, optimizing for engagement inevitably feeds homophily. It feeds tribalism. It blows up the bridges to keep you happily bonded on your isolated ideological island. But I want you to imagine a thought experiment. Imagine if a major tech company, perhaps pressured by new policies or a shift in culture, decided to radically rewrite their code. Imagine an algorithm specifically, mathematically optimized to generate bridging social capital.
That is a fascinating, almost utopian engineering challenge.
Think about what your feed would look like tomorrow morning. If the machine wasn't trying to make you blindly angry or trying to bathe you in comforting agreement, but was actively, gently trying to make you safely and productively coordinate with someone who is your exact political or cultural opposite. Could we use code to engineer serendipity instead of echo chambers? Could we take the greatest, most frictionless coordination tool in the history of human civilization and use it to rebuild the exact bridges it helped destroy?
It's a powerful question to end on.
So the next time you find yourself sitting on that couch on a Tuesday night, scrolling through your feed in the dark, have a second, look at the glowing rectangle in your hand and ask yourself, is the signal I'm receiving right now helping me build a bridge, or is it just adding another brick to a wall? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the feed. We'll catch you next time.